What's up, everyone? It's Isaac Smoldon, the production manager here at my house. Just a heads up that today's episode of Diagnonsense is part 2 of our 2-part series about Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand with Todd Smoldon. So if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, go ahead and go back to episode 32, Who is John Galt, and then come back for this episode. Enjoy the show.
90% of the time, I have no idea what I'm talking about.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets the people going.
You are now listening to Diagnonsense
Then we would just be idiots saying nonsense.
with Kurt Honack
Damn it.
and Isaac Smoldon.
I am also here. I think the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because regardless of what you think of Ayn Rand, and I don't think she's a nice person, but I think that this world that she created is it shines such a light on the two sides of our current political philosophies, where you have the one side that is, I should be paid fairly for the work that I do, and I shouldn't be told what to do with my money. And on the surface, that's great. That's a great notion. But the dark side of that is a lot of these people then don't care about others, are truly selfish individuals, don't have that top of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy, where they're able to better their fellow man and have empathy for others and find that self-actualization. And then the other side of the political spectrum, they talk a really big game, and it's all about, we should lift others up so that we have equal opportunities for all, and everyone should be the same. Everyone should be able to have this great life. And on the surface, that's a great idea, and we need compassion for others. We need to help those that are less fortunate. But the dark side of that is so many of these individuals in the movie, it's just all virtue signaling. It's meaningless. Like, they want to project this image. I think one of the main characters' brothers is a really good example of this. Like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm the person that saved America with this bridge, even though he's incompetent and he didn't really do anything. And he's talking up all the local ladies, letting them know what a great guy he is, and then his marriage falls apart because he's talking the talk, but he doesn't know what he's doing. And I guess I'm not saying that that side of the political spectrum is incompetent, but just like both sides, I think there's good people on both sides of the political aisle. I think there's things that are right and wrong and different pieces that are important from both sides of the political spectrum. But in our society, and this is something that we've talked a lot about, Kurt, and kind of going back to the people that truly are the victims of this universe, is we're losing a lot of our ability to think critically and decide what pieces we want to pull from different talking points and different pundits. We're not able to, I think we do a poor job of electing people that are genuine and truly want to work together to change our communities for the better. And it gets even more exasperated when, especially in this universe, all the decisions are being made at this federal level, this huge overarching pyramid, and it seems like local government and local communities have zero power to control anything or make decisions for themselves. The power of individuals is so lessened in this world. And so I think that there's this universe, if it does one thing well, it's really good at shining a light on the hypocrisies of both sides of our current political climate.
Yeah. Did you play Bioshock? That was kind of a critique of Ayn Rand.
So I haven't.
I know.
I haven't gotten around to playing Bioshock.
That sounds like a rabbit trail.
But I want you to break down Bioshock for us so that we can bring the conversation, the Bioshock conversation.
Andrew Ryan, which is a play on Ayn Rand, runs Rapture, which is a under the water city where they take all the elites, kind of like in Atlas Shrugged, and it's no gods, no kings. It's basically just science. It's like, okay, we're taking all of our very talented people and we're going to turn this into a meritocracy and just innovate our way out of all of humanity's issues. And what ends up happening is they develop a gene editing substance and people start taking this, and the meta of like how people climb the social ladder becomes so dissolved that like the whole city turns into a science experiment and collapses because the people that are innovating things that are changing the social fabric. And it's a tale about the failure of objectivism, which was Ayn Rand's philosophy, but it really captured my interest because at the time we were living through an opioid epidemic, and I myself had been through dozens of psychotropic meds, and I thought, this is really interesting because there's something they're trying to tell here that's bigger than just a critique to Ayn Rand. And I just thought it was fascinating because there's an argument to be made. I think that's where we're seeing the lack of compassion parallels, right? Because in Bioshock, so they develop this substance and everybody's editing their genes and climbing the meritocracy. And then there's virtually like no compassion. And I feel like the creators of that series like picked up on the critical nature of Ayn Rand towards compassion. And that speaks to more to, and I know I don't necessarily want to turn it into a religious conversation either, but I think it's interesting that she came from the Russian Revolution, which overthrew the czars and the monarchy type of system where it's like our theocratic maybe, but was still very critical of religion, which is I think fair because the American Revolution, right? That was part of our birth. But it's interesting because it's almost like she carried over the critical. She was critical about religion, but also government, and almost to the point where the individualism like fills that vacuum to the point where it's like an extreme. And just from like thinking about it, and there is a question if the meritocracy, it's like, okay, if we depend on these people and you have to have something to trade, if our science is developed to the point where the human being is not as essential to that process, what would our society look like? And I feel like we're doing that on some extent with like the technology front, with like social media and drugs.
What you're saying is your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they never stopped to ask if they should.
And this speaks to that
style.
larger, yeah. Well, I mean, that speaks to that compassion. I think not fear, but the kind of critical, way that we're kind of feeling about maybe the compassion lacking from Atlas Shrugged or objectivism.
Well,
maybe.
I think another problem with our modern, as we sit here and look at something that was written, 70-ish years ago, I think?
Probably. Let's
Wikipedia it, Kirk.
Yeah.
So is the definition of compassion has changed also. And I am actually concerned about what we consider a modern definition of compassion, because it seems like compassion in our modern society, and especially with the young ones, not to become an old man sitting on my porch yelling, "Get off my lawn," but is that compassion means to give someone something. And it's very compassionate to start a business and employ 20 people,
right,
which feeds 80 people, and creates products that are consumed by hundreds of people. That actually can be very compassionate. One of the untold stories of the robber barons. What in history, what we like to focus on the fact that they were rich, and the term robber baron became used as a pejorative. But if you look at those people and how they changed society, the railroad industry, how much cheaper that made products, the oil industry, which got rid of all the crappy smoky lamps that everybody was burning.
Saved a lot of whales.
It did, actually. The electricity that was then created, so that people could read 24 hours a day or do whatever they wanted to. Essentially, street lights became more prevalent, which meant there was more economic activity after dark. So, yeah, I'm also concerned about this understanding of what is compassion, and that, in fact, and we can get into this a little bit. I know you guys are in the human services industry, but, the whole idea of enabling versus actually helping somebody.
Developing.
Exactly.
Somebody, yeah.
Because enabling is not compassionate either.
Yeah.
Right? True compassion is when you're able to help someone who is in a lower situation or a situation in which they're struggling, and you're able to develop them or help them to develop economically, mentally, behaviorally, whatever that is, so that they can then, and I'll say it because I believe it, more fully utilize the gifts and talents that God has created them to use. I mean, that's compassion. Just giving someone like a living wage. Everybody needs to make a living wage. I have no idea what that means. Like, literally, that's a very subjective term, right? So I've heard people say that you should be able to have a whole bunch of stuff that I never had when I was 19 years old. When I was 19 years old, I didn't feel like I wasn't making a living wage, and I was sharing an apartment with 3 other people, and I had a crappy car, and I didn't go on vacation, and of course there weren't cell phones back then, so I didn't have entertainment at my fingertips anytime I wanted it. But I didn't think that I was necessarily in a bad state. I just was young and didn't have a lot of money. And now we're hearing these ideas of a living wage, which is very subjective, affordable housing. Again, that's a very subjective term. So there's some confusion around this idea of compassion and what people's basic needs are. And then that bleeds into political philosophies, and then government policies, and things that impact our economic system.
I think that's why wraparound services are so important. That's why we have that mentality of a hand up and not a handout, and why we don't just sit here and hand out food. Michelle talks a lot about sleeping bags and gas cards is not an acceptable, if that's all you're doing, that's not an acceptable form of homeless services. I mean, you're just, you want to talk about a living wage or affordable housing. Neither of those is that either. That's why you need the peer support. That's why you need the mental behavioral health services. That's why you need substance abuse treatment. And
in Rand's world,
that what you wouldn't get substance abuse treatment.
How does that happen?
Well, right? it wouldn't happen from either side. I mean, if there was an individual that wandered into rich people land, then and he was addicted to heroin, they're not going to give him, you can stay in this lean-to, and we're going to help you with your withdrawals, and we're going to get you some counseling and give you an opportunity to get back up on your feet, because we all have, a little bit excess money and we can afford to build this. And then eventually, once you are healed, you will be able to contribute to our community by working in our community and work your way up and be part of this economic process. But it's not going to happen with the government in Rand's novel either, because they're making decisions at such a high level, and they're not able to, they're just trying to slap Band-Aids on things. well, take this government assistance and go sleep in a congregate shelter, because then at least you're out of the rain. We're doing our job. But there's no exit strategy, right? That's something we've been hammering a lot lately, and maybe it's because I've been doing some grant writing on on the side. But exit strategies it's not a part of the equation for so many people. You have these big circles in our continuum of care, and it's a circle, and you put someone inside the circle, but it might as well be a ring of fire, because they're never going to leave that circle. They're never going to be able to achieve what their potential is, because they're trapped inside the bubble of all of these social services. Right, the bubble,
trapped in the bubble of assistance.
Trapped in the bubble of help, and there are people that need to be in the bubble of help. But if the bubble is a pathway with a water bottle station here and a spot to sleep here and someone to walk with you, along this part of the path, and then you get into, you get through the mountain pass and you're on the other side, then you can contribute, and then you can help others. And a great thing about the peer support model is if I'm going to keep trying to continue with this analogy, then a lot of those people get to the other side of that path and they turn around and they walk with people and they hand out water bottles along that path. But I think that's something that a lot of our service providers in the system were missing for a long time, was those wraparound services. The definition of housing first, for example, I think has changed a lot, where it's, well, the solution to homelessness is housing. It's like, well, that's part of the solution. I mean, housing is a key part of the solution for how do we solve, quote unquote, silver bullet, solve homelessness. But so much more of it is how, you give someone a house, how are you going to keep them in the house? If they're still sick, if they're mentally ill, if they're going through mental health struggles, if they're addicted, if they're having substance abuse problems, they're not going to stay in that house that you just gave them. They're going to destroy that house, and then they're going to just move along, because you've given them no tools to A, stabilize, and then B, without job training, without the treatment, and without an incentive to leave as well, without an incentive to move out of that bubble. Sometimes, maybe you're asking what the definition of compassion is. Maybe sometimes compassion is knowing when to give someone
kick someone in the backside.
Kick someone in the backside. Sure, you can do that compassionately. You can do that with love, and sometimes we all need a little kick in the backside, and you just have to. You have to surround people with love. You have to surround people with compassion. You have to surround people with services, but you can't suffocate them with services. And I think we're making headway in that field. I think that a lot of our community partners here locally are on board with the same vision, the same mission. But change is always too slow with a lot of these issues that we face, with the opioid crisis, Kurt, like you were talking about earlier. I mean, it seems like every time we seem to make headway in one area, there's the next bad thing, there's the next new drug, and we're right back to square one. Yeah. And I don't know if there is necessarily a solution that we can come up with sitting at this table for that. But I think how we position ourselves, how we conduct ourselves when we look at some of those problems goes a long way to it, at the very least, helping individuals that find themselves in those situations.
That's why you need to have the freedom to invent and innovate. And that's why it's really important that our systems, our institutions, and this is something that this was the big thing that she highlighted, which is that all these regulations and the control of the elite, government elite, not those who went to the Magic Valley, that they really stifled the ability of people to innovate. You need that,
which is fair.
Yeah, you need that innovation and invention in the compassion industry. the real compassion industry, as well as I guess what you call like the monetary economy or the monetary part of our society.
Yeah.
And you can have groups that stifle that compassion in or that innovation in the compassion industry too.
And it's hard for me to tell. Well, and I think she was pretty serious about her philosophy, though, and so it's hard for me to tell whether Atlas Shrugged was like a rhetorical essay on that, or whether it was she literally believed that is the guaranteed outcome for societies that don't like let this meritocracy kind of dominate the innovation and the because yes, you don't want to stifle capitalism and development and ingenuity, and that's arguably how the United States did not collapse under the pressure of the Soviet Union, right? But at the same time, I see the criticism of stories like Bioshock, where that's a game, but it was still compelling about the criticisms of where innovation, if like at its extreme, could create harm, and people, if they don't have that compassionate element, that we could end up in a situation where we have I really believe that with pharmaceuticals right now in our country, that we are, we're innovating and developing all the time, but we're not asking what happens to people who take these drugs 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road. And yes, we want people to innovate and we want that field to develop, but we also, I don't think we want to crowdsource the science on everybody and just, it's like, well, you weren't valuable enough to our society to be to innovate something, and therefore your value gets
you're a
displaced into a sacrificial lamb for that very meritocracy that's trying to save people. And I think that's where I have issues with Rand, but it's hard for me to tell. Like I said, I don't know whether it was more of a rhetorical essay or if it was more of a literal.
It struggles to find that line a little bit sometimes. I think
because like I know it's cheesy at this point, but everything taken to extreme, I think everything misinterpreted can be dangerous. Maybe not taken to sometimes freedom's extreme.
Yeah.
So
it's a whole different podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole different podcast. So
I don't know, Dad. Can you think of any time that a small group of individuals have consistently decided year over year that they know what the correct use of a resource is compared to individual households or families?
You mean like the PFD?
Well, that's all the time we have for today. That's all the time we have for today, everyone. I'd like to thank Todd Smoldon for joining us on this podcast. His views do not necessarily represent the views of my housemate Sue or anyone else. His views are his own. But I do appreciate you stopping by, because this is something I've wanted to talk about for a good while. And again, I think regardless of where you stand on Ayn Rand or on this universe, I think that it does do a very good job of asking some questions, sometimes some very blunt questions that are silly, but they are worth thinking about, even if you can say, hey, that question is stupid and wrong.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of fun doing this, and I think if I had any parting comments, it would just be that I think we have to be careful to not equate certain types of systems with automatic results, and I'll just say it again in terms of like the idea of capitalism creating greed. I disagree with that. I think human nature can create greed and creates the desire of some people to hurt others for their own benefit. But it's not an economic system that creates that. The free enterprise and the freedom to voluntary exchange with each other most often creates an increase in wealth. And what people do with that wealth is up to them individually based on how they perceive benefits and costs. But it was a good conversation. So thanks,
Kurt.
I would agree with that, and I think Ayn Rand saw that kind of because she was so critical of everything, and I think she took that away. She took that away from the wars. I think she probably saw all that, and the objectivism. Everything has to be rational. It has to be provable, And so I think that's fair, and I would agree with that too. Studying the history of mental health. I don't, evil happens under, doesn't matter what kind of economic system you have, evil can happen.
Yeah.
Do I think that there's some systems that are better than others? For sure. But I think she was onto something, even if it was a little cold.
a little cold.
Yeah.
A little cold.
Well, what controversial subject should we talk about next time? What book is more controversial?
Yeah, in the culture, to me, some of the cultural battles are not as significant as. I don't feel like that's always where. I don't feel like the culture is always focused on where the meta is, man. Like where the most change can be.
Societal meta.
Yeah, I don't always feel like those are focused on where the most change can be.
My dad's a big Clash Royale player. He'll tell you all about the meta.
He'll tell you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So,
what's the meta definer right now in Clash Royale? Give us your top list right now, Clash Royale.
Sorry, no.
You're not giving out free advice.
No.
He's also John Locke on Clash Royale.
Look me up.
Should have been John Galt.
Should have been Jason Bourne. No, no, it's terrible.
All right. Well, hopefully we didn't stop recording.